organization while raising more than $500,000 towards Indiana-China Business Initiative. Prior to joining ACSI in 2013, Colin served at the Indiana Economic Development Corporation and was a Governor's Fellow for the Office of Indiana Governor Mitch Daniels. Mr. Renk graduated from Indiana University, Chancellor, with a BS in Public Management in 2011. A native Hoosier, Mr. Renk is very active in Indianapolis' international community, serving on the Advisory Council for the Immigrant Welcome Center, the Global Indie Council for the Indie Chamber, the Indiana Advisory Committee for the U.S. Global Leadership Coalition, the Planning Committee for the Indianapolis Chinese Festival, and as Vice President of the Indianapolis Cologne Sister City Partnership Committee. And now you get a welcome here to Northwest Indiana. Let's welcome Colin.
Hello, everyone. I'm just so happy to be here, have some nice fried chicken and beans. Oh man, it's going to be so great. So I have a little presentation for you up here, but what I think I'm going to do is I'm going to sit down because I don't want to block everybody's view over here. So we're just going to talk a little bit about Indiana, China, US, China, but I want this to be a conversation. So let's be talking together. If you have any questions, feel free to interrupt. We'll just go from there. So, I think this is going to be a weird little way of doing this, but ACSI, American China Society of Indiana. We operate a lot like an Indiana-China Chamber of Commerce, if you will. So our job is to help facilitate business between Indiana and China both ways. So to help Chinese firms, investors find opportunities to invest in Indiana, but also help Indiana companies that are looking to export their goods, open up a factory in China. And so we are a 501c6 nonprofit, and we were founded in 2010. So we have a long list of board of directors throughout the entire state of Indiana. And we're a membership-based organization, so these are our charter members. And we have a lot of different corporate members. The only one missing is Gary Chamber, so we'll add you guys up here. And as you can see, it's really kind of a broad array. So we help support cities and towns, economic development organizations, manufacturers, bankers, lawyers, accountants, everything. So, the Indiana-China relationship. So we're going to talk a little bit about history. So this is going to be really, really hard to see, everybody. But this is actually in Indianapolis in 1904. And the Royal Prince of China, future Emperor of China, came over from Beijing to Indianapolis to open up their Chinese restaurant. And so if you think about how, it took me 2.5 hours to drive up from Indianapolis to go to Beijing, it's a 24-hour flight. This would have taken months back in 1904 via steamship, all to literally open up a Chinese restaurant. So it's kind of an interesting first story. But let's talk about the business side. We are a business organization. So Eli Lilly has actually been in China for 100 years. And so, a lot of people reach out to me now and say, hey, Colin, there's a lot of turmoil right now between U.S.-China business relations, and now is probably not a good time for me to do business. I point to this as an example. Eli Lilly survived the end of World War I, World War II, Mao Zedong, Cultural Revolution, opening of China, and they've been obviously doing quite well in China, as you can see. Cummins has been in China, and really they were at the forefront of the great opening of China, which happened in the early 80s with Deng Xiaoping. So Indiana is really well known and represented in China. Now, the Indiana-Zhejiang relationship. So in the United States, we have states. In China, they have provinces. And one of their provinces is Zhejiang province. And that's actually a manufacturing powerhouse. So we are very lucky to have them as our sister province. And that was established in 1987 by then Governor Robert Orr. Indianapolis, obviously the capital of Indiana, is also twinned with the capital of Zhejiang, which is Hangzhou. And so there's about 12 Indiana communities that have sister state relationships with Zhejiang province. And so what we like to do is about every 5 years or so, we like to reaffirm that relationship. So this happened in August of last year. In typical Chinese fashion, it was the Indiana Zhejiang 30th Anniversary Celebration and Business Seminar. Yeah. So to the left is Governor Holcomb. Here. To the right, this guy, that's their party secretary, which is the equivalent of their governor. They have a governor, but party secretary is really on top. So he's the head leader in Zhejiang. So we reaffirmed that relationship. And then what we did also is we brought 30 Chinese companies and 120 Indiana companies together to do business matchmaking. So let's dive into some of the inbound opportunities, outbound opportunities, and the like. And obviously, if you guys have any questions, feel free to interrupt me and we'll talk about it.
No, they'll ask them after your presentation.
Okay, all right. Okay. So one of my favorite questions that I'm asked: how many Chinese businesses are in Indiana? And usually what I say is, what do you classify as Chinese? So here's a list of some of the companies that I classify as Chinese, but they don't even classify themselves as Chinese. So a good example is this, Vanguard National Trailer, also known as CIMC, China International Marine Container. So when I started at ACSI in 2013, I called them up, said, hey, I'm Colin Renk, I'm with the American-China Society of Indiana, I just wanted to talk with you for a little bit. I said, about what? He said, well, you're the China International Marine Container. Yeah. Well, I just wanted to talk and learn a little bit more about you. You're a Chinese company. No, we're not. But you're China International Marine Container. Yeah. You're owned by the Chinese. Yeah. All of your financing comes from China. Yeah. But you're not Chinese now. And basically it just ended like that. But what's interesting is in a lot of rural communities, you're not going to be raising the China flag and proudly saluting to this. Vanguard National Trailers and Logistics, a trucking company, and so they downplay it as much as possible. They will say, according to the Indiana Secretary of State, we are an Indiana business, as most Indiana businesses are. And so a lot of times what you'll see is that these Chinese businesses, they don't operate as Chinese. If they purchase or do mergers and acquisition, it's very subtle. And a lot of times you don't even know about it. And some of the paranoia that comes from it is, you see this, Luncheon America, which is up in Lafayette, they do aluminum extrusion. They recently changed their logo away from red because they thought red was a communist color and people wouldn't want to do business with them. So the Chinese are very particular and a little bit paranoid when it comes to all of this. But if you want to look at some of the Indiana or the China-based companies here in Indiana, obviously a lot is in the central region, but you guys actually do have a lot up here. And one of the conversations that I had is, I think Gary's really uniquely situated between Chicago and Detroit in that corridor of investment. And also, if we're talking about Chinese businesses in Indiana, it's really diverse and across the board. So we have a white goods manufacturer, so laundry machines, washing machines, things like that. Obviously manufacturing, logistics, high tech. In fact, one of the ones that I met last week, and I kid you not, I walked into the factory space. It's called Furion, which is an Elkhart. I walk in, I open the doors, they literally have an RV trailer, because Elkhart's got big RVs, but it has a helicopter that lands on top of the RV and then goes into the RV. And so I even asked them, okay, well, what are you trying to do with this? Like, what is your market strategy? So, well, we're just trying to appeal to the rich folks. Like, but I'm thinking too, like, as an RV, like, if you're going to be out in the forest or whatever, when do you need a helicopter to go up the street? But that's neither here nor there. So, what's been going on between Indiana and China recently? Beijing West Industries, actually, they should be operational later this year. Broke ground on a site in Greenfield, so 440 new jobs, $80 million investment. SF Motors in Mishawaka, 430 jobs, $30 million investment. Hidea Power Machinery, okay, 10 jobs, $500,000 investment, not that significant, but it's a great story. So I was actually in Anderson at the time, and they showed up at my office, unannounced, no email, no calls, just knocked on the door. And one of my colleagues there said, hey, Colin, so there are some Chinese people at your office? Like, oh, okay. What do they want? They want to meet with you. It's like, all right, well, I'll meet with them later tonight. So I meet at the most extravagant place, the Ramada Inn by the airport, to have a nice business meeting. And so we sat down and talked, and they said, okay, Colin, we'd like to invest in Indianapolis. We want to open our North American Distribution Center, our first one. We'd like to finish this by the end of the week. Can you help us? Things move very fast in China. Anyone here that's been doing business in China knows. So, hook them up to lawyers, bankers, accountants, and we're looking at different sites. And I finally take a step back and say, why Indiana? Why Indianapolis? Why are you here? He said, well, we are from Hangzhou. You remember? Hangzhou is the capital of Zhejiang. Hangzhou is sister cities with Indianapolis. So we said, that's a good place for us to do business. So it's kind of interesting how relationships are formed in China. So types of investments. The majority, 98%, is actual mergers and acquisitions. Only 2% are those greenfield investments. So greenfield investment means a Chinese company, creates an actual factory here. Mergers and acquisitions, they just buy it. And so in terms of future outlook, expect the same. More mergers and acquisitions. Chinese FDI to the US actually shrink. And that's really twofold. So one is, obviously Trump has made some changes with everything, but also Beijing has a new policy which they roughly translate into unnecessary foreign investments. They're trying to crack down a little bit on that, but business is still booming throughout the entire state. So let's look at outbound opportunities for a little bit. So again, this is Indiana to China. So there's lots of Indiana companies in China, as we talked about before. Let's look at exports. So if there's one thing that you need to remember today, is that when you hear about the trade deficit, that means just goods, not goods and services. Okay. So Indiana exports to China in terms of goods. If you look at the entire growth, from 2008 to 2017, it's grown 110%. Compared to the rest of the world, those exports only grew 37%. So in terms of Indiana businesses doing business in China, now is the time. If you're looking at Indiana's top goods export markets, obviously Canada and Mexico, NAFTA, makes sense. But China's right there at number 3, 3.1 billion. What types of goods are being exported? We have oilseeds and grains, pharmaceuticals, motor vehicle parts, medical equipment. So kind of traditional Indiana products. This is the part that's always missing in the equation, services. Now remember, services are an export. So if we're looking at the service industry in terms of exports, that's grown from 147 to $856 billion. So a growth of 480% compared to 52% throughout the rest of the world. You might be asking, what the heck is a service export? Education. Anytime a Chinese student enrolls in a university here, that is an export. They are paying money to receive a service, which is education. So every time Trump says we have this deficit, this is not a part of the equation at all. In fact, if you added them together, goods plus services, we would have a surplus. So, unsurprisingly, Indiana's top service export market is China. Bizarrely enough, Ireland is number 2. I have no idea why Ireland would be number 2. But education is really the top service export. Travel, royalties, trademarks.
The services, is that Chinese students that come here, or I know we've gone over there to do education too.
How would that be set up?
I mean, the arrangements where we have people here that go over and set up educational systems or schools or training over there.
Yeah,
Is
that
that
count?
What about the online education part where, you can sign up to teach the children in China?
Yeah, that is a part of the equation too. But what's sort of interesting on the educational side, if we're looking at U.S.-China educational systems, China is very much the Confucian model. The Confucian model is we take a book and we cram it into your head. Now, the U.S. model of education is you need to think outside the box, think creatively. And there, a lot of times, lies a struggle between those two models. So sometimes when Chinese students come here, a lot of the universities that we work with, they say, they are great test takers, they know their things, but get them in front of an audience they can't speak. They have no idea how to think outside the box. And that's a big struggle. So a lot of times with online component classes, that in itself is really confusing because, we profess, okay, you need to, how would you, think about solving this problem? And, to them it's X, Y, it has to be a very mathematical equation. So they struggle with that, but it's actually eroding a little bit. And we're seeing a lot of Chinese parents and families sending their kids earlier over to the US or to find the American systems of education, because if they come when they're 18 or 19, sometimes it's too late. But if they come at 14 and 15 and they're sort of used to that inquiry model, that really helps them later down the road.
All right, any other questions? Write them down. We'll do them after the,
That's
president.
fine.
Well, out of respect for everybody's time.
That's fine. And
Well,
I'll be
okay,
here,
we're
so.
good. Let's get through the presentation. If you have any questions, we'll have time for a few questions.
All right. Thank you.
All right.
So, one of the things that we did last year is we brought in Alibaba. Or is anyone familiar with Alibaba?
Yeah.
Okay. Does anybody know what November 11th is? Means? Anybody? What? I thought I heard.
Singles Day?
Yeah, Singles Day. So Singles Day is, it's like the prototypical Hallmark holiday. It's the anti-Valentine's Day plus Christmas. So what they did is they said, all right, I'm tired of this. I'm a single person. You have Valentine's Day, you have Christmas. I'm going to buy something for myself. So Singles Day, 1-1-1-1. Yeah, so that became a holiday in itself. And so what it is if you're single, you buy stuff for yourself. But if you have a partner, you buy something for them because you're glad that you're not single. So it's a really catch-all for everything. But what's interesting is it's the biggest consumer shopping day basically in the world. So this past Singles Day, $40 billion worth of goods were sold in 24 hours. Wow. 40 billion. And so e-commerce and Alibaba is the biggest opportunity for Indiana companies right now. So the Chinese middle class equals the American population. Total volume on Alibaba, which is essentially an Amazon, is greater than the 5 largest brick and mortar American retailers combined. So there's 507 million people just use it monthly. 1.7 billion products are listed. Huge demand for American foreign-made goods. That cannot be understated. Chinese are hesitant to purchase Chinese-made goods. But you got to think about it. So their middle class is growing. They have more purchasing power, and they're used to. There's better quality now, but a lot of times Chinese products are great. Or the best example is I remember one of my friends who was in China for 2 years came back, and I said, "Well, what's been the thing that you missed the most?" They were like, "Eggs." I'm like, eggs? Surely you found eggs. And they said, well, but there's been an issue with eggs. What people have been doing on their markets is literally dipping chemicals in together to create a fake egg. So you crack it open and all these chemicals spill out because they don't have FDA regulations. And so that's why a lot of times in China, people will pay 3 to 4 times more to just get that little made in the USA label because then they know that it's quality. It's been checked. The U.S.-China trade war. It was funny, someone was coming by, hey, are you okay? And I'm just literally checking my phone because I wanted to make sure there weren't any tweets that I missed over the past hour or so. This has been crazy. So, as a lot of you guys know, Trump launches this investigation into steel imports, sort of not surprising. And basically the thing to know is, in March, he imposes his steel and aluminum tariffs. And then on April 2nd, China imposes tariffs. And then we come back and impose more tariffs. And then the day after, they impose more. So why? Now again, remember, exports is goods plus services, not just goods. So if you just look at this U.S. trade in goods with China, right now we have a $375 billion trade deficit just with goods. If you add services into this, it is a surplus. So that's one thing. But China's technology transfer policy is a huge issue. And it hits a lot of Indiana companies really hard. So basically what happens is, say I want to manufacture this phone over there. I'm an Indiana company and I want to go manufacture this phone over there. I literally have to hand the blueprints and all the intellectual property over to the Chinese government first, and then I can make my product over there. You can imagine that's a little bit difficult because then the Chinese government can hand this over to another Chinese manufacturer to use it. So, what's been sort of commonplace now has been, if you're an Indiana company and you're making, again, a phone, what we recommend is you only have parts of it manufactured in China, scattered around, and then it's assembled here in the United States. That way they can't put it together and steal the intellectual property. What's next? So as of, what time is it? 12:49 on June 11th, the trade war is on hold. And really what sort of creating this is just they wanted to wait until after the G7 summit and then after the talks with Kim Jong-un. So I expect to hear an update on Friday, but I think what's been really noticeable over the past week or two is back in February and March, we were saying, I shouldn't say we, the United States government was saying that the reason we are imposing these steel and aluminum tariffs were because of national security interests. That's sort of the workaround for the World Trade Organizations, because you can't indiscriminately target one country with a tariff and not all of them. And now that's basically completely ripped up, because if we are imposing tariffs on Canada and classifying it as a national security risk, then that's just crazy to me. So the good thing is, especially with U.S.-China relations and the trade issues, it's everywhere now. Every single country in the EU, UK, NAFTA is worried about Trump and escalation with tariffs. So I just wanted to talk a little bit about some of the common challenges that Chinese and Hoosiers have. So one is the mutual understanding and awareness. So a lot of times folks from China say, oh, Indians live in Indiana, right? Native Americans. So I'll literally take them to my office and they're like, where's the teepees? Like, I don't understand. Because literally it translates into Land of the Indians. And they don't have a real understanding of what the U.S. has to offer. They understand the coasts, but they don't really know what's in between. On the U.S. side, or Indiana side to China, folks think China's one market. I mean, that's the equivalent of us saying people from Portland are the same as the people from Indianapolis, same from New York and Miami. These are all completely different things. And you add to the fact that in China there are different cultures and different identities within that. There's Mandarin speakers, Cantonese speakers, lots of different dialects. So it's important that you understand who you're talking with. Hoosier naivety, that plays us so much, because the Chinese are very indirect speakers, very high context. So if I'm trying to do a business deal and I say to you, I'm the American, you're the Chinese. All right, so I really think you should invest in this. This is a great idea. What do you think of it? And he'll say, yeah, it is. He's saying, yes, I heard you, not yes, I agree. And this happens all the time. An Indiana company will come and see me, a mayor will come and, oh man, we just lined up all these investors. I'm like, well, what did you say? Well, no, they said yeah to it. They said yeah to what? And again, it's the high context. Chinese do not like to say no. They will avoid it at all costs. But with the high context side, if they're ignoring you, if they're not replying back to your emails, the answer's already there. Yeah. You just don't see it. And then probably third, but definitely not last, is didn't do homework. A lot of times folks will go on delegations and they have no idea who they're meeting with. They're not doing all of their due diligence with finding the right Chinese partner. One of the worst calls that I ever get are, hi, I'm an Indiana company. I found someone on the internet that could be my Chinese partner. They told me to wire them $50,000. And now I'm pissed. And they're like, I never want to do business with the Chinese again. And I'm saying, you get those scams all the time. Like I always get like, I am a princess in Nigeria. You can get taken advantage of by anyone, anywhere. So always do your homework at the beginning. So, got to do a little plug, how we can help. So, every year we do a China Business Conference, and that's to help Indiana companies and leaders understand China, what's going on right now, because as a lot of people know, things happen very fast in China, very quickly. So, it's important for us Hoosiers to stay up to date with the latest trends. We have a career fair, and that's one of the things I'm really proud about, is to help international students find opportunities to live and work in Indiana. So, that helps diversify our workforce and globalize our companies. So in Indianapolis, we have a funeral home provider called Flannery & Buchanan. They wanted to come to one of our career fairs. Kind of odd. But they import a lot of granite from China for tombstones. And their whole supply chain logistics was kind of array. They hired an MBA student, Chinese speaker, to be an intern. Within a month, they hired him full-time because he became such an invaluable asset to them and really helped grow their China operations so they could hire more people. So that's one of the things that we like to do, and we've done it at both Purdue and IU. We do one-off business seminars. We did one about 2 weeks ago, talk a little bit about trade and tariffs, but then also the intercultural communication. I was working with one particular Indiana company, and they made a huge cultural faux pas. What we always advise are, if I'm trying to talk to this gentleman ahead, and he can only speak Chinese, I can only speak English, and we're using an interpreter, you look at him when you're talking to him, even though you're talking to the interpreter. And so what happened is, this gentleman's like, okay, we can't wait to do business with him. He's such an asshole. A lot of times, Chinese will pretend that they don't know English. Right. But they do.
That's a deal breaker.
That's a deal breaker. So again, it's to understand the indirect talk speaking versus direct, high context, low context. Again, to try and help our workforce understand things a little bit better. We do a lot of inbound delegations. So what we always try to do is roll out the red carpet as much as possible because that's what they do for us in China. And most of the time, people aren't going to remember a PowerPoint presentation like the one you're seeing today. And so a lot of times when Chinese delegations come, it's not like they're going from Beijing to Indianapolis to Beijing. They're doing this entire tour and then going to Barbados for 2 weeks or something. So what we did for this particular one is we rented out Bankers Life Fieldhouse. Half of the court was a basketball shoot around. The other half was a business networking event. And so, like, I kid you not, there are all these, fancy Chinese millionaires and billionaires with all these furs coming in. They say, oh, basketball. They take them all off when they're shooting hoops. And the Logansport mayor completely got them all with 3-point shots. I mean, it was a great time. And again, that's sort of like, you get to know that person a little bit better. And relationship building, Wanchi, is so important. Outbound delegation. This was when then Governor Mike Pence went over in 2015, and we expect Governor Holcomb to go in December of this year, so we need to assist with that. Guidance and assistance, this is my bread and butter of what I do. Anytime there's an Indiana company that needs help going to China or a random Chinese investor that needs help here, that's our job. We're the great facilitators, so we're the ones that are plugging people in. We don't do fees for services, none of that. So it's just to help our members and then Chinese investors as a whole find better business opportunities. We also help with site selection and government relations. So with that, I will close. If you have any questions.
Well, first of all, wow, what a great presentation. You got business people, educators. Colin, you hit the mother load, man.
And the shipping.
Yeah, so that was really great stuff, man. We really appreciate you coming up and making that presentation. Now, what I'm going to do first is what we always do, out of respect to our media people. If you have any questions, any of you first, because we're respectful of deadlines and anything. You good? What about the post? You good? You good? Where's Girly Suggs? Are you good?
With the higher labor costs here in this country and lower labor costs in China, why would any Chinese businesses want to come and open factory or any type of business here in this country?
Retention. So one of the big issues is when you have an economy that's booming, which the Chinese will say it's not booming, but it's at 7% GDP right now, which is it's booming. There's a lot of turnover. And in fact, I was trying to help this one, I just have to do a little tangent here. This one Indian company that's setting up a shop in China. So if you think about traditional workforce here, it's you might get a yearly bonus, you get 2 weeks vacation, but that's about it. In China, usually I think it's somewhere between 10 to 20% turnover every year is the norm. They expect bonuses every quarter and every month. In fact, what you usually do is you pay them for 13 months for 12 months of work. You have to have all these different commissions built into it. Then a lot of times they'll just leave no matter what because they're trying to get as much money as possible. Because again, when they were used to 10% growth rates every year, they're expecting 12% increase in salary every single year, including the bonus structures. And because of that, it's been an issue for a lot of Chinese manufacturers in China to keep their workforce there because people are moving around all the time, and you don't really see the flexibility of a workforce that America has. We can be on this assembly line, then we're comfortable at this assembly line and moving all around. In China, a lot of times it's very specific. They have 5 line workers, and if 2 of them leave every year, then there's only 3, and then it gets backlogged, and it just becomes a huge issue. So they want American workers because we show up, we stay, we're loyal.
Just to follow up, because I've been to China many times, and from the times that I first started going there, I noticed, of course, now they're starting to have a middle class, where before the labor was really cheap. So now that the labor costs are higher, is it still economical for American companies to do business over there?
Yeah, and it sort of depends on what you're looking to do. And really, it has to be on the due diligence for whatever the company is. If it's low-level manufacturing, well, just because of the the costs, the rising wage costs, might not make more sense. But if it's something more technical, or if there's some sort of issue in terms of regulation, so that's why Eli Lilly has a lot of presence in China, because they can skirt around some of the FDA regulations, which it takes the bureaucracy of America can sometimes hamper and hinder progress sometimes. So it sort of depends on what the industry is and what you're trying to make too. Because again, we always advise companies that don't go to China to have your entire product line made. Only do it for one specific thing. And if that's working, then maybe just incrementally have that going up. And then sometimes what we're seeing now is, because like I said before, that Made in USA label is so important to China, a lot of American companies or Western companies want to manufacture in China for the Chinese market. Because then they can still say, if they have the name recognition of, oh, this is a good quality American brand, well, it's still made in China by a Chinese labor for the Chinese, but they are willing to pay a lot more for it. And in fact, there was another company that I met with, and it was with Klipsch. Klipsch, makes radios and, speakers and things like that. High quality speakers. Now, when they first went over to the China market, they had a terrible time. They could not sell their product at all. And so they finally asked some of the consumers, well, why are you not buying these? They're too cheap. These are American. American is supposed to be really expensive. And so literally all they did was increase it by 50%, and then they sold out everything.
Oh, wow.
And it's because they associate American products, expensive, must buy.
Wow. It's a marketing strategy. Mr. Ellis.
In your presentation, you mentioned that the future, you said smaller businesses and investments from the Chinese. What does that mean for Indiana?
So it's more of an incremental model. So before, a lot of times Chinese investors would reach out to me and we have this huge grand idea. We're going to do like this. Back in 2013 and 2014 with EB5, we want to create a Chinatown, Indiana. We're going to have all these different industries come together. And it's like, yeah, let's just do phase one. And so what we're seeing now is, a good example is that Hydea Power Machinery. So they have long-term plans for Indiana, for their North American distribution center. But they only want to do phases at a time. So like phase one, let's start small and then ramp our way up. And more of that's just because of the capital controls in terms of moving capital and money from China to Indiana. And the second part is, we don't know where trade relations are going. So you don't want to be moving your entire, moving and trying to open up to a new market all at once when, every week, we get the on-off switch, off switch from Trump. So we're just seeing it being a little bit more cautious. But at the same time, and I was talking to someone else earlier today, it's actually been accelerated. So small, but lots of them, because a lot of people in China are worried that they're not going to be able to get their money out. So another thing to understand about the Chinese middle class is they're very hesitant that because the Chinese government owns everything. You don't own land in China, you rent it for 99 years, the Chinese government. So they're so paranoid that the Chinese government will come in and take all of their wealth away. So they want to diversify, they want to get it out. And one of the common things that I get every week is investors reaching out to me, sending me emails. Colin, I want to invest in Indiana. Cool. What do you want to invest in? I don't care. I want to invest 5 to 25 million. Okay.
We don't care.
Yeah, exactly.
You talked about the synergy of Gary's location between Chicago and Detroit. What would be your recommendation for the city of Gary to take advantage of that location?
Relationships. There's actually a really good organization based out of Chicago. It's called the China General Chamber of Commerce, Chicago. And they have the express written consent of the Chinese government to do business. So because you guys are so strategically located, to be involved with a lot of the greater Chicago events and when the delegations are coming in, because FaceTime is so important to the Chinese. If you go to China, don't expect meetings from 9 to 5. You're going to dinner with them. You're going to do karaoke with everyone. It's going to be all right. But you need to develop those relationships. So because you guys are at a unique location, and there's a lot of great things going on in Gary right now, take advantage of that when these folks are coming in. I'll be talking with Chuck as people coming in.
My interpreter and our lead person, Mike. We'll have NIPSCO in China before you.
There you go. Right?
Oh, anybody else? Yeah.
Yes, Colin, I had another question. I've run into several firms in the past that oh, we're trying to save some money, we want to get, part of our manufacturing done in China. And then they run into these agents, oh, we can help you out, and I tell them, stay away from that.
Yeah.
Now, would they be better to go to you to help them out, or just set up the right relationships in manufacturing in China?
Yeah, because the biggest thing is always do your homework. Do your due diligence, know who you're working with, find the right Chinese partners. Because a lot of times people, especially where you said when people are trying to save money, if that's the number one thing when it's coming to China, don't do it.
Yeah.
Because you will find inferior products, and actually what happens too is if you're going to China to manufacture cheap things, what happens is the quality over 6 months just completely deteriorates. So you might already have the specifications of whatever you're making, and then they're just going to try and keep you out of it so they can make more money. Because if you're dealing with people that are just trying to save you money, then they're doing the exact same thing too. Always doing homework. If you want to reach out to me, we have great relationships with the consulate, commercial services. So we're the ones that sort of do the due diligence to make sure you're working with the right partners.
And I think true too, sometimes they don't realize what the transport costs are from there to here.
Yeah.
And netted too.
Yeah.
Okay, Dr. Renk?
I want to linger on education a bit. On the news this morning, it was reported that President Trump is going to limit the visa standards for students coming from China here, limiting their visa for 1 year. My concern is that we are not doing enough to increase relationships with our students and the Chinese students and their culture. What are your recommendations for that?
So that's actually been one of the biggest issues with China-U.S. relationships right now, and I feel bad because I'm just going to go on tangents here, but I'm trying to think. Millennials is a generation here that we kind of associate with. In China, they're called the little emperors. That's the university students right now. So think about China for a second. So they have the one-child policy. You have this family structure where grandparents and parents all live in one house. They're diverting all of their attention and resources because their parents' generation was the first that made it rich into this one individual. They have such a hard time, acclimatizing themselves to different cultures. They don't know how to date. They don't know how to even talk to other people because they grew up literally in front of all the new video games and they've been doing this, and they have such terrible social skills. And a lot of universities are struggling with this because before it was they would silo themselves within the Chinese community. So the Chinese students at Purdue would all huddle together. Now it's not even that. I mean, they're so isolated they'll lock themselves in their dorm room and not talk to anybody. And so, one of the things is, we're trying to implement strategies to try and get them out of their shell and get them a little bit more accustomed. One of which is, coming earlier. If you're 18 or 19 and you're coming to the U.S. for the first time, sometimes it's a little bit harder to get ready. That's why we're partnering a lot with high schools, so that we can establish exchange programs so they're a little bit more used to American culture here. And, especially if you come over with a high schooler, and you usually do like a family exchange, you're with the family, so you have people looking over you and checking in on you and things like that. But then also just empowering them. So, allowing these Chinese student groups to work with other things. So one thing that we're doing is we're creating an advisory board, and we're actually going to give advisory board seats to these Chinese student populations, so that they can feel like they have a buy-in to Indiana and a buy-in to sort of the policy that's going on between Indiana and China.
Let's take one more, if there's one more.
I went to Purdue, and I was in a conversation the other day about Purdue is now like one of the largest universities in Asian population, and the majority of it is Chinese. Is there any significance of that for Indiana? Is that
What was really funny is 2 or 3 years ago there was a poll done, and more people in China thought Purdue was an Ivy League school than not. So
Yeah, we don't want to hear that, do we, Jeff? We don't want to hear that.
No.
All the I degrees in here. It might be over here.
Part of it is STEM and engineering. A lot of times, Chinese parents are pushing their kids into a very STEM-focused degree, and so Purdue obviously is really good for that. And then it's just also the recognition and the relationship that Purdue had with China 10 or 20 years ago in terms of recruiting that in. And everything in China is relationship-based. So those seeds that were set 10 or 20 years ago are really paying off because a lot of the high-level, C-level rich folks in China might have been to Purdue. So then that sort of creates this, just keeps on expanding and growing.
Hey, Jerome, congratulations being elected to our board, and your term has expired. Hey, you know what, before the chancellor get out of here, I gotta deviate from the program for a little bit. Colin, I need you up here. Don't anybody move a muscle, because you know we give away stuff, and Chancellor, I need you too. And I need these ladies over here. You know why? Because I'm on the same page. The chancellor will leave. I'm on the same page with Dr. Green. Education is very important right now, particularly in Northwest Indiana and Gary. And so we just want to make sure we can capture. Ted, you want to take care of it? Come on, ladies from the school. Or a representative, whoever. We'll do this real quick.
Thank you.
Okay, step back. Come on, Chancellor. Come on, ladies. We'll intersperse you all in between here just to make the pictures look even nicer. We'll get a shot. There we go. And I'm gonna put it here, because, Colin, I tell you, I think we're gonna have some discussions about the education aspect of how